Title: The Day Silver Pine Lane Changed Forever. I still remember the afternoon everything spiraled out of control, an ordinary day that turned into the unimaginable. My sister, Julia, had dropped by for a casual visit, just to chat and maybe share a cup of tea. But within moments, she was in handcuffs, arrested by the so-called neighborhood security officers, a self-appointed HOA enforcement group known around here as the HOA cops. They wore smug expressions, wielding their petty power like a badge of honor. What they didn't know was that Julia wasn't just any concerned neighbor. Behind her calm demeanor was a secret that would unravel a chain of events no one, least of all the HOA, could ever have foreseen. Because when the Secret Service arrived, everything changed. I had always believed that a neighborhood should be a place of peace. You wave to neighbors during your evening walk, borrow sugar when you're out, and watch each other's kids from across the street. But the illusion of that comforting ideal shattered when I moved into Silver Pine Lane. Freshly divorced and looking for a quiet place to rebuild, I bought a small bungalow 2 blocks away from Julia. She encouraged the move, claiming the community was tight-knit and safe. On paper it was. In reality, the HOA ruled with an iron fist, hiding their power trips behind rules that felt less like guidance and more like a contract with the devil. They had rules for everything. The shade of white allowed for fences, the acceptable decibel of a dog's bark, how long your trash bins could sit on the curb. It was absurd, but I tried to stay compliant, convincing myself to keep my head down and avoid conflict. Julia was my lifeline during those early days. Only 3 years older, she'd been through more than most. A Peace Corps veteran, she had learned resilience, diplomacy, and how to spot tyranny when it crept in under the guise of structure. She told me to keep my eyes open. It didn't take long before the HOA began harassing me with warning letters. My lawn was too tall by half an inch. My vines were growing into the neighbor's airspace. They cited me for nonsense. It wasn't order, it was bullying. Julia urged me to document everything. And then came the day. It started with a knock at the door. Julia had stopped by for tea, and we were deep in a conversation about a neighbor named Rachel who'd just been threatened by the HOA enforcers for letting her teenage son chase his dropped phone near the community dumpster. Julia was furious. She said, "We need to find out who's really behind all this." Before we could continue, 2 HOA enforcers stormed onto my porch. One was short and stocky, the other tall and wiry, both with the kind of self-importance that made your skin crawl. "You there?" The shorter one barked at Julia. "Are you the homeowner?" "No," she said, "but I'm her sister." "Then you're trespassing." Julia blinked, baffled. "Trespassing? On my own sister's porch?" They cited obscure HOA codes and claimed that non-residents needed prior written consent to be on the property. When she laughed in disbelief, they threatened to arrest her. I stepped in, demanding what legal basis they had. That's when things escalated. Without warning, the shorter one whipped out handcuffs. "You're under HOA detention," he declared. Julia didn't resist. She stood tall, staring at them with a chilling calmness as they bound her wrists and dragged her down the steps. I was too stunned to stop them. They took her to the community center, their makeshift HQ, and locked her in a room. When I ran there minutes later, they blocked me from entering. "She's interfering with HOA business," they claimed. I called the police. They said it was a civil matter. They wouldn't intervene. My sister was being unlawfully detained, and no one would help. That's when I noticed him, a man in a suit, older, quiet, observant. He was standing near the door, blending in too well. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt something. Recognition? Threat? The HOA enforcers told me to leave, or I'd be detained too. I left, furious, helpless, shaking. That night, I barely slept. I posted about it in a private neighborhood group. A few people replied, expressing sympathy but unwilling to act. Fear had infected this place. Fear of retaliation. The next morning, everything changed. A pounding at my door startled me. I opened it to see 3 men in dark suits. "Secret Service," one of them said, showing his badge. "We're looking for a woman named Julia." I froze. "That's my sister." "But the HOA has her." He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." 10 minutes later, black SUVs pulled up outside the HOA community center. Neighbors watched from their driveways as the agents stormed in. The HOA enforcers, so smug the day before, were pale now, stammering for words. "We have reason to believe you're detaining a federal witness," said the lead agent, Agent Rains. Step aside. The short enforcer from before tried to resist, asked for ID, mumbled something about authority, but it was useless. They escorted us inside. Julia was handcuffed to a chair. The man in the suit from the previous day stood in the corner. When Agent Rains saw him, everything exploded. "I've been looking for you, Dalton," he said. Dalton. The mysterious man wasn't just some HOA consultant. He was a fugitive wanted for financial crimes and suspected ties to extremist groups. Julia had identified him months ago. She had been working quietly with the Secret Service to build a case. The HOA enforcers had unknowingly arrested a federal informant. The fallout was immediate. Local police finally showed up, now taking orders from federal agents. The HOA board resigned en masse. Several enforcers were arrested for unlawful detention. And the puppet master, Kyle Monroe, the HOA president, was nowhere to be found. Julia and I were taken back to my house, where Agent Rains explained everything. Julia had suspected the HOA was more than just a nuisance. She had uncovered financial inconsistencies. When she recognized Dalton at a fundraiser, she quietly tipped off the feds. They were using HOA funds to launder money, Agent Rains said. Fines, penalties, fake violations. Those were all ways to pressure residents into handing over money. The whole system was a front. Over the next few weeks, Julia and I poured through evidence, helping the feds track Monroe. Eventually, a tip led us to a rundown motel 2 towns over. We drove there ourselves. Just to confirm, we told ourselves. But when we spotted him and he bolted, instinct took over. We chased him, cornered him, and just when things were about to turn violent, just as he lunged at Julia to snatch her phone, black SUVs screeched into the parking lot. Agent Rains stepped out. "Call Monroe," he called. "Hands where we can see them." Monroe froze, then surrendered. It was over. The days that followed were full of headlines, courtroom proceedings, and a wave of neighborhood reckoning. Monroe was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, intimidation, obstruction of justice, and illegal detention. Several of his associates within the HOA were also indicted. Federal prosecutors described it as one of the most egregious abuses of HOA power in state history. Julia was invited to testify before a congressional panel on abuse of authority in private communities. Her testimony was powerful, emotional, and utterly damning. Victims from other states reached out. Advocacy groups offered her positions. She declined most. "I'm not doing this for politics," she said. "I'm doing this so it never happens again." In Silver Pine Lane, change took root. A new HOA was formed, democratic, transparent, community-run. All enforcement was handed over to city authorities. Residents once silenced by fear now gathered freely, discussed openly, and walked proudly. Julia and I organized a community memorial, not for lives lost, but for trust regained. We planted a tree in the main park with a plaque that read, "Where fear once grew, hope now stands." Under the sunlit sky, neighbors we once thought indifferent came forward. They brought food, offered hugs, and whispered apologies. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded us that even a fractured community can heal. A month later, we got a call. Monroe had pleaded guilty. He accepted a 22-year sentence as part of a plea deal. The courtroom was packed. Julia and I sat in the front row. When the judge banged his gavel and pronounced the sentence, a collective breath was released. A chapter was closing. Julia squeezed my hand. "We did it." I nodded, fighting tears. We really did. And that, finally, was the end of it. We didn't just survive Silver Pine Lane. We reclaimed it. End.